Yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m. at General Eisenhower's headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and of Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied expeditionary forces and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command. Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight, Tuesday, the 8th of May. But in the interest of saving lives, the ceasefire began yesterday to be sounded along all the fronts. The German war is therefore at an end. We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing. Today is Victory in Europe Day. Advance Britannia! Long live the cause of freedom. God save the King.
Hello everybody, I'm Jamie. I'm going to be speaking to my mother, Marie Luke, about her memories of the Second World War and hopefully some of her memories of the 8th of May 1945, VE Day.
If I remember them.
If you remember, yeah, Mum, remind us, when were you born?
December 1932.
Rotterdam. You were born and raised in Rotterdam.
Yes.
You're a Dutch girl.
Yeah.
So in 1940, the 10th of May, the Netherlands capitulated.
By the Germans.
Yes, you were just 7.5 years old.
Yeah.
But you do remember some things. For example, you remember the Germans marching in. That amused you and your sister no end to watch the Germans marching in.
We marched beside them.
That's right. You would goose step with the Germans.
Yes.
And they would not just march, but they would sing as they marched.
Oh, yes.
You thought that was a lot of fun.
But we just went la 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 la.
Do you remember telling me a story about sitting on a train with you?
Yes.
And you and your sister Marianne, you were staring wide-eyed at these German soldiers having
yeah. And they shared with us.
What were they eating? What were they eating?
It was just sandwiches.
What was on their sandwich? Do you remember what was on the sandwich?
Yeah, I think ham.
And you and your sister stood there staring at them.
Yeah, and they gave us some.
They gave us, in their own way, the German soldiers, a lot of the German soldiers were quite kind to you.
Yes, they were, yes.
And
they gave us their sandwiches.
And your parents, my grandparents, were involved a little bit in the resistance movement.
Yes.
And they would hide what you call, onderduikers.
Yeah.
Onderduikers, those are people that are trying to get away from forced labour. Germans would send young men to labour camps in Germany to help with the war aid. So onderduikers would sometimes stay in your house. What would happen if the Germans came searching the houses for onderduikers?
My mother hid them.
Where would she hide them?
In the attic.
In the attic. Right. How long would they stay there for?
Oh, quite a wee while, and because sometimes we get Germans in searching the house.
Yes.
So they just stayed very quietly there.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. You were not allowed to do that, you know.
Yeah.
To do it, but we had them in the attic, and we had just a wooden trap door, so we never even opened that when the Germans came to search the house. My mother made them coffee.
Made them coffee.
And they were sitting just talking, and then they were taking us on their lap and say, "We have little children same age as you know."
But you knew you weren't to say anything about the Onderdijkers.
No, we didn't say anything because we were told not to talk at that at all.
No, right, that's right. And so, in order to distract the Germans, you told me you and your sister would talk to them about their children. And do you have any chocolate?
Yeah, that's right.
Any chocolate for you? Do you have a cigarette for my father? Do you have a cigarette for my father?
Yeah, and I got it.
You got the cigarettes for your father. Had the Germans found those Onderdijkers, there could have been some terrible consequences.
They could have shot us.
You told me a story of one day you're in town with your mother, and the Germans came into town to grab young men, and what would happen to those young men that they grabbed?
They shot them.
They shot them. Now, what did your mother do to make sure that you and your sister were safe?
She ran away with us.
Yeah, and grabbed your hands and ran as fast as you could.
Yeah, well, I remember that the Germans were shooting in our street.
Yeah, but who did they shoot? What were they shooting at?
I don't know, because my mother didn't leave us.
That was they came in looking for men. They're gathering men together to punish the Dutch for resisting. And they came
my
in.
mother hid my father.
Your mother hid your father as well?
Yeah.
Why did she hide your father?
That's so otherwise the Germans would have taken him.
No. So that brought you to the end of the war. What do you remember about the liberation? Do you remember any Allied soldiers coming into town?
Yes, and they were dancing with the Dutch girls in the street.
In the street, very nice.
Yeah.
And was there any singing?
Oh yes, we all sung, and Marianne and I danced with them.
Marianne, yes, your sister Marianne.
Yeah, and we grabbed them. And then they danced with us.
Wonderful.
Marianne and me.
Very good.
Yeah.
One of these Onderdijker, he actually came back.
Jacob Raster.
Jacob Raster. And
Yeah.
he wasn't a Dutchman though, he was actually from...
No, he was Yugoslavian.
Yugoslavian. And he came back some years after the Second
To
World War.
thank my mother.
To thank your mother.
Yeah.
Ken and I are with Margaret McCord from Anahilt to have a wee chat about her memories during the war.
I remember German planes coming and dropping bombs on Belfast. We heard the planes coming over and we saw them drop, and then the flames went up and Belfast was lit up with just, the bombs were everywhere. So they were 12 miles from Belfast, our home, and we had, when they were dropping, we had to go underneath the stairs in case the planes would come near the house and drop a bomb on our home. And later on, my brothers built a bunker in the garden in case we would have to use it. We had to have blackout blinds on, and if you hadn't a blackout blind, you made your own blind with paper, lots of paper, and so the light wouldn't get through, because if it did get through, you were fined by the police. We were asked to take evacuees from Belfast, for they had no place to go. We had 3 properties, a dwelling house and 2 other houses, and there were about 15 or 16 of them came. My brother then fixed up the radio that he could read the news to the evacuees, and they all came in, 16 of them, and they sat at the bottom of the stairs, and my brother read the news. And I think good lot of the news came from the Belfast Telegraph. You were set out a sheet of paper and it told you what you had to do to make sure the land was all used to feed the people. Right. The soldiers would have helped in many ways. My father used to go to Belfast and gather up students, and some people were just hanging about the street corners, and gathered up about 15 or 16, and the army lorries brought them out to the farm, and they gathered potatoes for about a week and more.
When the war ended, what happened? What do you recall of when the war ended?
Well, all I can remember is the radio going on and everybody cheering in the house that the war had ended. I spent that day, and my mother had walked maybe about 3 miles to a friend of my mother's, and they played the piano and all the tunes that were played during the war. They played the piano, and there was maybe 5 or 6 of us, my aunts and cousins and things, where it went, and that's how. I don't know what happened in Hillsborough. I'm not sure. The soldiers went down the Ballygan Road in army trucks and gun carriages and one thing or another, and they had sweets, and they would have threw the sweets out. Mummy allowed us to go down to the end of the road to see them, and they were more than kind. So they were, and I can always remember somebody telling me about them leaving a box of onions along the road somewhere between Ballygan and it must have been the Lurgan Road, and the people, because onions were very, very scarce, and then the people shared them one with the other, so they did. Took the lorries 4 hours coming down the Ballygan Road where I lived to go on to the road towards Lurgan. 4 hours. There was lorries, jeeps, tanks, brain gun carriers, and all sorts of army equipment. The soldiers would throw lots of sweets, even a box of onions, as I told you, to help people. And there is my Aunt Lizzie's medal. She served in the British Red Cross Society. My mother also served in the British Red Cross, but unfortunately we have lost her medal.
So we've called with Dorothy Malcolm today to have a chat with her about her memories of during the war and of relations that she had in Anahilt and the Spa.
So Dorothy, what is your maiden name?
My maiden name is Adair. My father came from Portavogie, actually down the Arts Peninsula. And my mother, she came from the Spa, but she came to live in Cargagway when she was 11. When her mother died, she lived with her aunt there. Aunt Jane and Robert John Irvine, they lived in a farm at Cargagway. And his brother Willie lived in an adjoining farm. And their sister was Aunt Agnes Jane, who lived in a beautiful cottage in Anahilt on the corner of Ballycloon Road and the main Ballyhenge, in the corner, that corner. That was the look on it. At school holidays, I used to always come up and stay with Aunt Jane and Uncle Robert John, and then always came down to see Aunt Agnes Jane. Was brought up in Bangor.
What year was that?
1925. The 7th of February.
So you're 100 years old now?
I was 100 years old last month.
Very good. You don't look it.
Oh, thank you very much. I don't know what a 100-year-old person is supposed to look like. When the war started, I was 14. 1939. It was a Sunday morning, and we were listening to the radio. I remember we didn't go to church because the Prime Minister was going to speak at 11 o'clock so we didn't go to church that Sunday. And it was Chamberlain, Reverend Chamberlain, and he announced that we were now at war with Germany.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
Of course, we didn't know what that meant, and so that was just when it started. Well, there was all the local activity, you know, ships coming and going, and sailors, mostly British now. There were Belgian and places like that, but the Americans didn't come into the war, you see, until 1941. Ulster was full of American soldiers. The American Red Cross took over the Picky Hotel in Bangor and turned it into the American Red Cross Club for the boys when they were on leave. You know, and they came from Castlewellan for the weekend and so on and so forth. And so there was about a dozen of us. Two Red Cross girls, American, came to the club there, and she phoned. The telephone exchange in those days, of course, was physically manned by girls who, they were all nice girls, because to be on the telephone exchange you had to be able to speak nicely, you know. So she knew she was doing the right thing. So she phoned up a friend of ours who was in the telephone exchange and said, you know, did she know about a dozen girls that would like to do hostess for the Americans? We had a very good social life up at the American Red Cross. I can't remember, I think it was probably mostly weekends. Can't quite remember. It was a hotel, and there was snooker, there was a record player, we danced with them, we just sat and talked to them. We never actually had a meal or anything, but have had donuts, coffee and donuts with them and that kind of thing. There was one fella, and I can't remember his name, but he was a really lovely dancer, and he came a lot to the club. I don't know where he was stationed, and I don't even remember much of a conversation with him. But he came and we danced together all night when he was there. And there was one time they took us all up to Langford Lodge, which was the army base. I think it was somewhere about the Maze, if I'm not mistaken. And so we all went up there, and one of the boys saw us, and he went and said to the other fellas that were in their quarters, "Oh, the girls from Bangor are here." Oh, they all swarmed down, and my dancer came and he danced, and I danced all night with him at Langford Lodge, but never went out with him. We were very fortunate that there was very little bombing here. There was one very, very bad. It was an Easter Tuesday. There was more people were killed in Belfast that Tuesday that were killed any other night. I mean, that was the one night that was so dreadful. I mean, England had it sustained all the way through the war. Yes, my mother and my two sisters and me, we were all sitting huddled together under the stairs, in the cloakroom under the stairs. And then I got out to see what my father was doing, and he was standing outside in the garden looking up, and there were flares, 4 flares, and he said to me, they must have dropped those flares there to indicate to the bombers coming over where to drop the bombs, you know. He was in the Home Guard.
Do you remember then when it come near the end of the war, about V80, was there much activity then and much celebration?
Oh yes, very much so. We knew the war was coming to an end, but we weren't just sure when, and we were standing in the queue to go in for our lunch in the office, still in the dinner queue, when word came through that the declaration had actually been signed and the war was officially over. And everybody was saying, oh, isn't that great, and oh, great, and all that sort of thing. And suddenly this wee voice came and said, the dances will never be the same again. And actually we're probably all secretly thinking the same thing, but weren't going to say it. This with the dances, I'll never forget that. And the girl that was a girl called Rhoda Christie. The dances will never be the same again.
So where were you working at that time?
I was working I was in the civil service, and I started off in Stormont. We were both controlled operators. It was the forerunner of computers, but we had to go to school to learn how to do it. You didn't just, it wasn't a thing you picked up. You had to go to school, proper school, to learn it, and you had to learn all calculations, you know, percentages, tons. You had to learn all that. To be in the civil service, to do the civil service exam, you had to be 18. But because comptometer operators left school about 14 and went to the comptometer school, if they had waited to take us in at 18, they wouldn't have got us. We all were employed by that time. So they had to drop it, and we were working from we were 15 really. And you got extra clothing coupons up to the age of 16 when you were supposed to have stopped growing by then. And there was another girl and I, and we had to go down to the office, it was the food office I think actually, to get extra clothing coupons. And so we said to the boss in the office, could we go down to the bureau? And she said, what for? We said, well, we have to go down to get extra clothing coupons. She said, what age are you? We said 15, and she nearly died. She just assumed we were all 18. So, Winston Churchill, Neville Chamberlain was Prime Minister when the war started. But about 1940-41, Churchill took over, and he was in it to the end of the war, and it was really Churchill that really helped boost morale. He boosted the nation's morale. There was a buffet in Bangor called the Crystal Buffet, and every Sunday night we would have all gathered in there after church, holding our hats in our hands. And if Churchill was speaking, as he did every so often on a Sunday night, young people, you wouldn't have missed it, you know. And everybody gathered into the Crystal Buffet to listen to Churchill making these wartime speeches. They were really wonderful, you know. It's amazing when you think of young people like 15, 16, not wanting to miss the like of that. It just shows you the power he had, you know. The gift of oratory. Oh yes, I remember the King. And of course I remember them all out on the balcony, and Churchill was there with them at the end of the war, and crowds of people. But you know what it's like down the Mall, you know, it was powerful.
Today, we give thanks to God for a great deliverance. Speaking from our empire's oldest capital city, war battered, but never for one moment daunted or dismayed. Germany, the enemy, who drove all Europe into war, has been finally overcome. And we know also that we shall all face the future together. In the hour of danger, so we humbly committed our cause into the hand of God. And he has been our strength and shield. Let us thank him for his mercies, and in this hour of victory, commit ourselves and our new task to the guidance of the same strong hand.